You wake up, go to the bathroom, and for a brief moment, you think you're done. But as you walk away, something doesn't feel right. There's a lingering pressure, a heaviness in your lower abdomen, a quiet discomfort that follows you through the rest of the morning. By the time the afternoon comes, your stomach feels tight, bloated, almost swollen. Your clothes feel a little more uncomfortable than they should, and you find yourself shifting in your chair, trying to ignore a sensation you can't quite explain. So you do what you've been told for years. You drink more water, you eat more fiber. Maybe you even add healthy foods into your routine. Oatmeal, whole grains, vegetables, and for a few days you think it's helping. But then, everything comes back. The same pattern, the same discomfort, the same quiet frustration that never fully goes away, and over time, you start to accept it. You tell yourself, maybe this is just part of getting older. You tell yourself, at least I'm going every day. But let me ask you something. When you leave the bathroom in the morning, do you actually feel empty, or do you feel like something was left behind? That subtle feeling, the one most people ignore, is the part that matters most. Because what most people call constipation isn't always about how often you go. It's about how completely your body finishes the job. And this is where almost everyone gets it wrong. You can go every single day and still be constipated. Not because your body isn't trying, but because your body isn't finishing. And when that happens, something very specific begins to build up inside you. Stool that wasn't fully passed stays in your colon longer than it should. Your body keeps processing it. More water gets pulled out. It becomes drier, harder, more difficult to move. And at the same time, bacteria continue breaking it down. Gas forms. Pressure builds, and that's the bloating you feel later in the day. Not random, not mysterious, but directly connected to something that didn't fully happen hours earlier. Most people never make that connection. They think bloating comes from what they ate at lunch, or something they shouldn't have eaten the night before. But in many cases, it starts in the morning, with a bowel movement that felt good enough, but wasn't complete. And here's the part that might surprise you even more. The problem isn't just what you're eating. It's not just about fiber. It's not even just about hydration. The real issue in many cases is that your gut is no longer working the way it used to. Not because something is broken, but because something has changed. After the age of 40, your digestive system doesn't suddenly stop working, but it does begin to slow down. The coordination becomes less precise. The signals between your gut and your brain become quieter, and your colon, the final part of your digestive system, becomes more aggressive at pulling water out of your stool, which means over time, everything becomes just a little bit harder to move, a little bit slower, a little bit less complete. And those small changes add up, day after day, week after week, until what used to feel effortless now feels like something you have to think about, something you have to manage, something that never quite feels resolved. And the worst part is, most of the advice people follow doesn't actually fix the real problem, because it focuses on adding more into the system, instead of helping the system do what it was designed to do. You don't need to force your body, you don't need to overwhelm it, and in many cases, you don't even need more fiber. What you need is to help your body finish what it starts, to remove the small obstacles that have been quietly getting in the way, to restore the signals that tell your gut it's time to move, and to change the condition of what your body is trying to pass, so it moves easily, naturally, and completely. Because when that happens, everything changes, the bloating fades, the pressure disappears. And for the first time in a long time, bathroom feeling something most people forget is even possible. Complete. Let me explain this to you the way I explain it to my own patients. What you are feeling is not random. It is not just gas. And it is not simply the result of something you ate the night before. It is a pattern. And more importantly, it is a process. When your bowel movement is incomplete, even slightly, a portion of stool remains inside your colon longer than it should. At first, this doesn't feel like a problem. You went to the bathroom, you felt some relief, you moved on with your day, but inside your body, something very different is happening. Your colon is designed to pull water out of stool. That is one of its primary functions. So when stool sits there longer than it should, your colon continues doing its job. It keeps removing water, which means that what remains becomes progressively drier, firmer, and harder to move the next time. At the same time, bacteria in your gut continue breaking that material down, and as they do, they produce gas. Not all at once. Slowly, gradually, over hours. That is why many people feel relatively fine in the morning and noticeably worse by the afternoon. The pressure builds, the abdomen feels tight. There is a sense of fullness that doesn't match how much you've actually eaten. And over time, this becomes your normal. But it shouldn't be, because this cycle does not stay small. When stool remains in the colon repeatedly, day after day, your gut begins to adapt to that pattern. The signals that tell your body it's time to go become less responsive. The movement becomes less coordinated, and the colon itself becomes less efficient at clearing everything completely. This is how occasional discomfort turns into chronic bloating. This is how sometimes constipated turns into always managing it. And this is why simply adding more fiber does not always fix the problem. Because if the system itself is not moving properly, adding more bulk into it can actually make things feel heavier. More pressure, more gas, more discomfort. I've seen this many times. Patients who are doing everything right, eating healthy, drinking water, following advice, and yet they feel worse, not better. Not because they're doing something wrong, but because no one explained what the body actually needs. This is not about forcing your gut to work harder. It's about understanding why it stopped working smoothly in the first place. And once you see that clearly, the solution becomes much simpler than you think. Now, to understand why this keeps happening, you need to understand something most people were never taught. Your gut is not just a passive tube where food passes through. It has its own nervous system, a network of millions of nerve cells that runs from your stomach all the way down to your colon. In medicine, we call this the enteric nervous system, but you can think of it in much simpler terms. Your gut has its own brain. It does not wait for you to think about digestion. It does not need you to tell it when to move. Under normal conditions, it coordinates everything automatically. When to contract, when to relax, when to push forward, and when to empty. And when this system is working well, you don't notice it. Things just happen. You eat. And later, your body responds. Naturally, predictably, completely. But over time, that coordination can become less precise. Not because your body is failing, but because the signals are becoming weaker. After the age of 40, several quiet changes begin to take place. The communication between your gut and your nervous system slows down. The reflexes that trigger movement become less responsive, and your colon becomes more efficient at absorbing water, which sounds helpful but in this context, works against you. Because the longer stool stays inside, the more water is removed. And the drier it becomes, the harder it is to move. So now you have two things happening at the same time. Movement is slower, and what needs to move is more difficult to pass. That combination is what creates the pattern so many people struggle with. And this is the part I want you to understand clearly. Your body still knows what to do. That system is still there. It has not disappeared. It just needs the right signals and the right conditions to function the way it was designed to. Because when those are restored, the system does not need to be forced. It simply starts working again. So instead of trying to force your body or overwhelm it with more and more inputs, I want you to think about this in a much simpler way. Your gut does not need more pressure. It needs better conditions. And in the morning, especially in those first 30 to 60 minutes after you wake up, there are three things that matter more than anything else. First, you need to remove the physical obstacle. If your body is in a position that prevents complete emptying, it doesn't matter how healthy your diet is, the process will never fully finish. Second, you need to activate the system. After a full night of rest, your digestive tract is quiet. If nothing signals it to start moving, it can remain inactive longer than you expect. And third, you need to change the condition of what your body is trying to pass. Because when stool is dry and difficult to move, your body has to work harder, and it still may not succeed completely. But when it is soft, hydrated, and easy to move, everything becomes more efficient. These three things, position, signal, and stool condition, are what your gut actually depends on. And when you support all three, you're no longer fighting your body, you're finally working with it. Let's start with the first piece. And for many people, this is the one that changes everything. Because it has nothing to do with what you eat. It has nothing to do with supplements. And yet, it directly affects whether your body can empty completely or not. It comes down to something you do every single day, without thinking. Your posture on the toilet. Inside your pelvis, there is a muscle that wraps around the end of your colon. You can think of it like a soft sling, holding that final section in place. And in your normal, day-to-day position, that muscle creates a natural bend, a slight angle, almost like a garden hose that is gently kinked. That kink is not a flaw, it's actually useful. It helps you stay in control throughout the day. It prevents things from moving when they're not supposed to. But when it's time to have a bowel movement, that bend needs to straighten completely, because only when that angle opens can everything pass through smoothly. Here is where the problem begins. The modern sitting position, feet flat on the floor, hips at a 90-degree angle, does not fully release that muscle. It keeps part of that bend in place. Not completely closed, but not fully open either. So what does your body do? It compensates, it pushes harder, it strains. And most of the time, but not everything, a small amount remains. And that is the part that matters, because that leftover stool stays behind and becomes the starting point for everything we talked about earlier. More water gets pulled out, more gas is produced, more pressure builds throughout the day. Now, here is the simple shift that changes this. When you raise your feet, even just a few inches, your knees lift above your hips, and that one small change straightens that internal angle, the muscle relaxes fully, the kink disappears, and the pathway opens the way it was designed to. Suddenly, your body doesn't have to fight. It doesn't have to strain. It simply completes the process, more fully, more naturally. And for many people, the difference is immediate. They notice less effort, less time in the bathroom, and most importantly, a clearer sense of being finished, not rushed, not partial, complete. You don't need anything complicated to do this. A small, stable surface under your feet is enough. A low stool, a stack of books, a firm box, something that raises your feet just 4 to 6 inches. That's all it takes. And if you have any limitations in your knees or hips, the goal is not to force the position. It's simply to create a gentle lift that feels stable and comfortable for your body. This is not a trend. It's not a trick. It's how the human body functioned long before modern toilets existed. And once you experience the difference, you begin to realize something important. Your body was never the problem. It was the position you were putting it in. Now, once you've removed the physical barrier, the next step is just as important. You need to give your gut a reason to start moving. Because after a full night of sleep, your digestive system is quiet. There is no food coming in. There is very little movement, and for many people, especially if your system has already slowed down, that quiet state doesn't immediately switch off when you wake up. It can continue well into the morning. Which is why so many people don't feel the urge to go until much later in the day, or sometimes not at all. This is where a very simple signal makes a difference. Warm water, not cold, not coffee, just warm water on an empty stomach. Here's why it works. As we talked about earlier, your gut has its own nervous system, and that system responds to physical cues. Temperature is one of them. Liquid enters your stomach. It sends a signal through that network. A very specific message, it's time to start moving. Your stomach responds. And almost immediately, that signal is passed further down to your colon. This is part of what we call the gastrocolic reflex, a natural response your body uses to coordinate digestion and elimination. But for many people, that reflex becomes less responsive over time. It's not gone. It just needs a clearer signal. Warm water provides that signal, gently, consistently, without forcing anything. Cold water can trigger a mild response, but warm water does it more reliably and more comfortably. And the way you take it matters. This is not something you rush. You take 1 cup, about 8 ounces, and you sip it slowly, over 5 to 10 minutes, not gulped, not all at once. Because the goal is not to shock your system, it's to wake it up. Then you give your body a little time, about 15 to 20 minutes. This is when that signal is active, when your gut is beginning to respond. And for many people, this is when the urge to go naturally appears. No straining, no forcing, just a response that feels normal. Now, if you're someone who has gone days without a bowel movement, this may not change everything overnight, but when done consistently, every morning, it begins to restore that rhythm, that timing, that connection between waking up and your body starting to move. And over time, that becomes automatic again. There's one more thing I want to mention. This works best when your body is actually hydrated, not just in the morning, but throughout the day. Because if your system is dehydrated overall, there is less fluid available for your body to work with, and that affects everything downstream. So think of this not as a trick, but as a signal, a way of reminding your body of something it already knows how to do. And once that signal becomes part of your routine, your gut begins to respond the way it was designed to. Now we come to the part where most advice starts to fall apart, because this is where people are usually told the same thing, over and over again. Just eat more fiber. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. But in practice, this is where many people actually make things worse. Because not all fiber works the same way. And more importantly, not all fiber works the way your body needs it to. If your system is already slow, if movement is already incomplete, adding more dry, bulky material into that system can feel like adding traffic into a road that's already congested. It doesn't solve the problem. It increases the pressure. It increases the discomfort. And it often leads to more bloating, not less. So instead of thinking about fiber as something you add more of, I want you to think about what your body actually needs at this stage. It needs moisture. It needs softness. And it needs something that allows movement to happen more easily, not with more force. And this is where a few very simple foods can make a meaningful difference, not because they are extreme, but because they work with your body instead of against it. The first option is the one that most closely mimics what your gut actually needs: chia seeds. But the way you use them matters, not dry, not sprinkled on top of something, soaked. You take 1 tablespoon, you place it in a full glass of water, and you let it sit for about 20 to 30 minutes. What happens during that time is the key. The outer layer of the seed absorbs water and forms a gel, a thick, soft, almost slippery coating. And when you drink that gel moves through your digestive system. It doesn't act like dry fiber. It acts like a soft, hydrating layer that helps retain moisture inside your stool. So instead of your colon pulling water out and leaving things dry, this helps keep things soft, smooth, and easier to pass. This is why many people find this approach feels much gentler. Less strain, less resistance, more complete movement. And the timing fits naturally into your morning routine after your warm water. About 15 to 20 minutes later, you take the soaked chia, and then you continue your day as usual. Just remember, this only works if it's hydrated. Dry chia seeds will pull water in the wrong direction, so always soak them first. The second option is something many people already eat, but in a way that doesn't fully support their gut: oatmeal. But not the sugary instant versions. Simple oatmeal, rolled oats or steel cut, and this is where we make a small adjustment that changes how your body responds to it. You add 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed, not whole seeds, ground, because your body can actually absorb and use it in that form. This combination does something very specific. The oatmeal provides soluble fiber that forms a soft, gel-like consistency as it digests, and the flaxseed adds both fiber and natural oils. That combination supports movement in a different way, not by adding bulk, but by improving texture, softness, flow. And for many people, this becomes the easiest habit to maintain. It fits into breakfast. It feels familiar. And over time, it helps create a more consistent pattern. Less effort, less variability, more predictability. The third option is for a very specific situation. And if this applies to you, you'll recognize it immediately. You go to the bathroom, but the stool is dry, hard, difficult to pass, and sometimes even painful. In that case, what your body needs most is not just fiber, It needs something that actively draws water into the bowel. This is where prunes come in, 3 to 5 per day, usually in the morning. Prunes contain a natural compound called sorbitol. And what sorbitol does is simple. It pulls water into the intestine, which softens the stool from the inside. At the same time, prunes also contain fiber and natural compounds that gently stimulate movement. So you're addressing both sides of the problem, softness and motion, and for people dealing with long-standing dryness, this can make a noticeable difference. Now, with all of these options, there is one important principle to keep in mind. You don't need to do all of them. In fact, it's better if you don't. You choose one, based on what your body needs most. If you want something closest to that gel-like, moisture-retaining effect, chia seeds are your best option. If you want something simple, familiar, and easy to repeat every day. Wheat seed if dryness is your main issue. Prunes are where you begin, but whichever one you choose, start gradually, because your gut needs time to adjust. If you introduce too much too quickly, you may feel more gas at first, more fullness, and that can discourage you from continuing. So begin with a small, consistent amount. Stay hydrated throughout the day, and allow your body to adapt, because this is not about forcing a reaction. It's about changing the condition inside your gut, so that movement becomes easier, not harder. And when that condition changes, your body doesn't have to struggle anymore. It simply starts doing what it was always designed to do. Now let me bring all of this together in a way that makes the underlying mechanism very clear, because once you understand this part, everything else starts to make sense. Your colon has a very specific job. It is not just a passageway. It is a processing system. One of its main functions is to absorb water. As food moves through your digestive tract, it starts out relatively liquid. By the time it reaches your colon, your body begins removing that excess water, gradually transforming it into solid stool. That process is normal. It's necessary. But over time, especially as you get older, your colon becomes more efficient at doing this. It pulls more water out, and it does it more aggressively. So if stool moves through quickly, everything works the way it should. But if movement slows down, even slightly, something changes. The longer stool stays inside your colon, the more water is removed, which means it becomes drier, firmer, harder to move. And this is where the cycle begins. Dry stool is more difficult for your body to push forward, so movement becomes slower. And because movement is slower, even more water is removed, which makes the stool even drier and even harder to pass, so your body has to strain more. And even then, it may not fully empty. That's the loop. And this is why many people feel like they're stuck, because they are trying to solve the problem with force, pushing harder, adding more bulk, hoping that more input will create more output. But the issue is not force, it's resistance. Think of it this way. If something is dry and rough, it sticks. If something is soft and smooth, it moves. That is the difference. And everything we've talked about, the posture, the warm water, the foods, all work in the same direction. They reduce resistance. They improve texture. They support movement without forcing it. So instead of asking your body to work harder, you're making the job easier. And when that happens, the system begins to correct itself. Not instantly, but steadily. Because your body doesn't need to be pushed into function. It needs to be placed in the right conditions so it can function on its own. Now, once you've addressed the core pieces, there are a few additional habits that quietly support everything we've just talked about, not as the main solution, but as reinforcement. The first is how you hydrate throughout the day. Most people focus on how much water they drink, but your colon responds more to how that water is distributed. If you drink large amounts at once, your body processes it quickly. Much of it passes through your system without being used where it's needed. But when you sip small amounts consistently throughout the day, your body has a steady supply of fluid to work with, and that makes a difference at the level of your colon. It helps maintain the moisture your stool needs over time. The second is movement. Your gut is not separate from your body. It responds to physical activity. When you sit for long periods, your digestive system slows down with you. But even light movement, something as simple as a 15 to 20-minute walk, can stimulate natural contractions in your intestines. It doesn't need to be intense, it just needs to be consistent, most days of the week. The third is supporting the bacteria that already live in your gut, because they play a role in how your digestive system functions. Foods like plain yogurt with live cultures, kefir, or fermented vegetables introduce beneficial bacteria that help maintain balance. And when that balance improves, many people notice less gas, less discomfort, and more regular movement. You don't need supplements to begin. Simple, consistent food choices are enough. And when these habits are layered on top of everything else, they help stabilize the system. So your gut doesn't just improve temporarily, it begins to function more reliably day after day. I want you to take a moment and recognize where you see yourself in all of this, because not everyone experiences this in the same way. For some people, the pattern looks like this. You go every single day, regularly, on schedule, and yet, by the afternoon, your stomach feels heavy, tight, bloated. If that sounds familiar, the issue is often not frequency. It's completeness. Your body is moving, but not fully emptying. And that's where posture and finishing the process become the priority. For others, it's different. You don't go every day. Sometimes it's every other day, sometimes longer. And when you do go, it takes effort. In that case, your system may not be receiving a strong enough signal to start. That's where the morning routine, especially warm water, followed by something like soaked chia, can help restore that rhythm. And then there are those of you who experience something more uncomfortable. You go, but the stool is dry, hard, difficult to pass, sometimes even painful. That's a different pattern. And it points to one main issue: lack of moisture. In that case, options like prunes or the right type of fiber that holds water become much more important. The key is this: you don't need to follow everything at once. You need to recognize your pattern and support your body accordingly, because when you match the approach to what your body actually needs, the response becomes much more noticeable, much more consistent, and much more complete. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This is not a quick fix. It's not something that changes overnight, and it's not meant to. Because what we're talking about here is not a temporary reaction. It's a pattern your body has developed over time. And patterns don't change in a single day. They change through repetition, through consistency, through giving your body the same signals in the same way, day after day. Some people will notice a difference within a few days. Less bloating, less pressure, a more complete feeling. For others, it may take a little longer, a week, sometimes two. That doesn't mean it isn't working. It means your body is adjusting, relearning, returning to a rhythm it may have lost over time. And that's the goal, not a sudden forced result, but a steady shift towards something more natural, more reliable, more sustainable. Because when your gut begins to function consistently again, you don't have to think about it anymore. It becomes something that simply works, the way it used to, the way it was designed to, for a long time. You may have felt like something in your body wasn't working the way it should, like you were doing the right things, following the advice, trying to take care of yourself, and still not getting the result you expected. And over time, that creates a quiet kind of frustration. To question your body, you start to wonder if this is just how things are now, something you have to live with, something you have to manage every day. But what I want you to understand is this: your body was never working against you. It was adapting to conditions that made its job harder than it needed to be, a position that didn't allow it to fully empty, a system that wasn't being activated at the right time, a process that was missing the moisture it needed to move easily. And when those conditions are in place, your body responds exactly the way it was designed to, quietly, efficiently, without force, because your body does not need to be pushed into function. It needs to be supported. And once you begin to support it in the right way, something changes, not all at once, but gradually. You start to feel lighter, less pressure, less tension in your abdomen. And then one morning, you walk away from the bathroom, and for the first time in a long time, there's no second thought, no discomfort following you through the day, no lingering sensation in the background, just a simple feeling that your body did what it was supposed to do, completely. And that feeling is something most people forget is even possible until they experience it again. Tomorrow morning, don't change everything. Just try one small adjustment: a glass of warm water when you wake up, a simple shift in posture, or one of the food options we talked about. And then pay attention, not to what you expect, but to what you actually feel. Because the difference, when it happens, is very clear. And I'm curious, when you walk away from the bathroom, does it finally feel complete? Or does that familiar sensation still linger? Let me know in the comments. Because sometimes the smallest change is the one that's been missing all along.